Hello and welcome to Press TV's debate. I'm Marzia Hashemi. Thanks so much for being with us. Well, maybe the watchdog needs a watchdog. This as the overseer of controlling chemical weapons in the world. The Organization of the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons has come under question about its honesty and integrity. The OPCW's leadership even tried to destroy evidence from its own inspectors about the chemical attack in Douma, Syria in 2018, which was blamed on the Syrian government. Now, the evidence released by WikiLeaks pointed to the attack actually being done by those on the ground, which would be the terrorists who control the city at that time, not the Syrian government. But of course, despite this, it was the Syrian people and government who paid the price as the U.S., France and Britain sent missiles to Syria, alleging that it was due to the Damascus government. Who is going to pay for this lie? Well, we'd like to welcome, starting off, Press TV's correspondent Mohammed Ali in Damascus. Mohammed Ali, bring us up to date on the latest with all of this and what it means.
Yes, this is definitely not the first time that WikiLeaks reveals more and more documents proving that perhaps the final report that came out from the OPCW blaming the Syrian government for carrying out a so-called chemical attack in 2018 is false. Now, this is yet a new document that WikiLeaks revealed yesterday. WikiLeaks website said that it revealed that a senior official at the OPCW actually ordered removing a paper trail on a report regarding the so-called alleged chemical attack. And that chemical attack actually, that report was a false flag report. Now, the entire story is about if the two gas cylinders found at the site were actually dropped by an aircraft of the Syrian government or not. This is the important point. Now, the previous document by the OPCW said that the final report that accused the Syrian government by the OPCW was not even written by the experts who actually arrived and inspected the site when the attack happened. Now, of course, this attack happened after this alleged attack happened. We saw the United States and its allies attacking the Syrian government in various locations after accusing them of carrying out such a chemical attack. Yet, even the report by the OPCW was not even issued. Now, President Bashar al-Assad made it clear, along with many other officials, several times that why would the Syrian government use a chemical attack at a time it was advancing? So all documents released now and being revealed prove once again that the truth was that those two gas cylinders were not actually dropped by air, but they were placed manually inside that area. And this is why all reports now are suggesting that the terrorists themselves placed those gas cylinders and tried to accuse the Syrian government.
Thank you so much for that update out of Damascus. That's Press TV's Mohammed Ali. Now, I'd like to welcome journalists from Al Masdar News, Brek Yonkers, to the program. Thanks so much for being with us. Your take on all of this, the significance of this, and actually the strange silence from around the world about this devastating report.
Yes, indeed, I think that the word devastating is definitely applicable here. Indeed, it's a scathing criticism of the OPCW and their double-faced analysis of the situation. And they are supposedly, of course, a neutral organization that works under the auspices of the United Nations, and as such is supposed to be a neutral organization. However, we have seen multiple times before that the OPCW has very quickly started stepping in the pace of the propaganda war against Syria, even back in 2008, and with any other similar claims of attacks that happened before and after that. But of course, this should be an earth-shattering conclusion, an earth-shattering revelation, and it's not for nothing, of course, that the founder of WikiLeaks, Julian Assange, is being treated like a terrorist and is basically slowly being killed in his prison cell in the United Kingdom as we speak. So this is the sort of work that journalists, investigative journalists, should be doing, which is to reveal the truth and to dig through the mountains and piles of lies that are being told. Unfortunately, I do not really expect that the mainstream media in any Western nation and any imperialist country is going to really make much of a mention about this, because of course this is completely against the best interests of the ruling classes and against the interest of the military-industrial complex in the United States, United Kingdom, France, and any other nation, including, of course, Israel and Saudi Arabia. So I highly doubt that this will even make it to national media in any major Western country, for that matter. Indeed, as reporter Muhammad Ali very well said already, these revelations basically confirm what Syria has been saying for a long time, together with Russia and the Islamic Republic of Iran, of course, is that for anyone who really thinks about this, the claims that were being made against Syria in the time of the Douma attack really make absolutely no sense. Why would Syria go ahead and destroy a city which is relatively close to Damascus in the middle of a highly successful offensive that they were waging? We have to keep in mind that the attack took place on the 7th of April, the alleged attack in 2018, whereas on the 31st of March 2018, the Syrian Arab army had basically already won and was just doing some mopping up operations in some areas of Douma. So why would they have to feel the need to do such a devastating chemical attack in violation indeed of international law, knowing that this would only draw more international attention and condemnation and extra trouble to Syria? This is not something you do when you're already winning a war.
Okay.
And
well, stay with me. Let me get my other guests in on this conversation. U.S. veteran Seth Manzel out of Belleville, Nebraska. Thanks so much for being with us. Hopefully you heard our guest out of Brussels, what he was speaking about and making some very interesting points about, to begin with, the questions were raised by the Syrian government, by Russia, by the Islamic Republic of Iran. Why would the Syrian government at that point in time actually do those type of attacks when it had been quite successful with its offensive, and so many other questions, and yet those questions were not heard and are not heard in the mainstream media even today, after these devastating reports have come out from the OPCW showing their total lack of neutrality and unfortunately seem to be totally in line with various Western powers.
Yeah, and that's certainly the case, and the idea of chemical attacks from the very beginning were pretty absurd. And if there were in fact chemical attacks, they were probably predicated by ISIS or any number of other groups that the Free Syrian Army, which was funded and trained and armed by the United States government under Obama and Secretary Clinton. So it's probably pretty likely that if there have been chemical attacks, they were predicated by people like that, and certainly not the Syrian government. It would be ridiculous to do that. And, Bashar al-Assad in his early days certainly did use chemical weapons, but since then he's had a fairly pluralistic government that's been welcoming of refugees from Iraq and people from all over the Middle East who have been fleeing oppression, and I have friends who fled to Syria from Iraq, and they were welcomed with open arms, regardless of their religious affiliation, and so but it's certainly in the interest of the United States it was in the interest of the United States to overthrow the government of Syria.
Well, let me just jump in right here with what you've just said. Seth, why would it be in the interest of the United States when we're talking about that the Syrian government was actually fighting the terrorists? And we're talking about, for example, this Douma incident, al-Nusra, or so many other Daesh and so many other terrorist groups that were there at the time. Why would it be in the interest of the United States to support terrorism and the terrorists over a government that has years of actually plurality in the country, of people with all types of perspectives, all types of religions, that they've been living peacefully there forever? So why would it be in the interest of the U.S. and others of its allies to support terrorism?
Well, how awful it would be if Iraq and was able to sell their oil directly to Europe, build a pipeline through Syria. That would be the worst of all possible things for the United States if the United States didn't have a client nation in place to control that pipeline. And that is one of the biggest things. I think all the nations in the Middle East, one of the ones that has commonality with the United States and with the or with the people of the United States is Syria, because it is so pluralistic. And so it's not the people of the United States; it's the commercial interests in the United States that would suffer if a pipeline were built through Syria, and that's one of the biggest threats to American business that could happen if God forbid Assad controlled a pipeline that went to Europe.
Well, Brett, your perspective, I mean, why is it that the United States, the UK, and France did not even wait for an investigation into the Douma attack, immediately pointed the fingers at the Syrian government, and of course bombed that country, allegedly due to the chemical attack?
Well, the thing is, the Western nations, like imperialist nations in general, have very often shown very little care and very little interest in facts and in true information. For them, what matters is to spread this, the line, spread the story that they want people to believe. And of course, if you want your people to believe indeed that Syria is ruled by a dangerous madman who gasses his own people, then the only logical quote-unquote response for you to take is to immediately basically attack. And the interesting thing is, we've seen that several times before. It doesn't really matter if it was a Republican or a Democrat in the White House, that in the United States, but as well in the United Kingdom or in France and many other Western nations, a well-timed conflict, a war within limitations, let's say, can be used as a very powerful political tool. We've seen that under the rule of Bill Clinton when he started bombing Yugoslavia and Iraq. We've seen that, of course, under Bush. We've seen it under Obama, and we're seeing it under Trump now as well. That when you time your conflicts right, it can really boost up your popularity and take away attention from the problems you have at home. That's one important part. Secondly, of course, the fact that for the United States, and I think that has been said very well by the other participant in the debate here, that the United States at that point still has actually a vested interest in destabilizing Syria and in ensuring that Syria either falls under this Greater Middle East project under the auspices of the United States, some sort of a Pax Americana system. And if they do not succeed in that, at least the United States still has this plan to completely destabilize and destroy Syria in the way that they have done with Libya, in which there is no stability whatsoever, but at least this war-torn country that has been shredded by conflict can no longer pose any serious threat to U.S. hegemony. So, of course, from the perspective of the American people, there is absolutely no reason, not really a benefit to Syria, especially if you will give the Wahhabi Takfiri terrorists a country, a platform to build in state on, of course, which has happened for a while under Daesh. But from the perspective of the ruling class in the United States, the fact that you can destroy any project for a truly sovereign Middle East is definitely worth a lot of money, and which means for them that it is worth risking millions of lives on potentially if it means that they can secure their hegemony over the Middle East.
Well, Seth, does this incident prove that there is an ungodly alliance with certain Western powers and various international agencies that they can basically manipulate at will depending on the circumstances? And if that is the case, how dangerous is this?
Well, the media in the United States and also across many other countries is largely homogenous. It's owned by very few corporations, and all of those corporations have interest in oil. All of those corporations have interests in U.S. imperialism, and so this isn't something that's going to be on late night, or it's not going to be on television here in the United States. It's going to be buried. Maybe in the back pages of some of our better publications, but we have very few of those. This is something that we're writing a narrative here in the United States, and that narrative is to maintain control over that area. That excuses to maintain that control over that area, and excuses to let our NATO ally Turkey maintain control over that area, and Turkey certainly isn't hesitant about using weapons of mass destruction or things like that either. So it's really really just an ugly situation for the soul of America.
Well, Brett, your take on this same question: how dangerous is it when we see that? When we see the situation that basically these international agencies are not neutral as they say they are. The danger of that, whether we're talking about the OPCW or we're talking about the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, or so many other agencies that we have seen over the years. But if they're not the neutral party that they claim to be, how dangerous is that in general?
I think that is indeed a massive danger to the world, basically. This is not, of course, the first time nor the only conflict in which UN agencies have proven to be very biased towards a certain side in the conflict. We're seeing it at this moment in Yemen as well. We've seen it, unfortunately, even with the World Food Programme, that is basically using their basic duty, which is giving food to the needy in Yemen, as a sort of weapon of war in order to further the Saudi causes. It's of course a different discussion, but we've seen several of those things happen in the past. The United Nations was used as a vehicle of war when attacking Libya in 2011. It has been used as a vehicle of war as far back as 2003 with Iraq, and of course, or at least a vehicle of justifying the war. Of course, not as a direct invasion tool, but there are several reports, of course, about abuses and crimes being committed by so-called UN peacekeepers in countries like Haiti, in Central America, in which they further their own ambitions by predating on the people who have already been suffering a lot through natural disasters or civil conflicts or wars. So of course, when you have this United Nations, this problem in which the United Nations is basically a vehicle for the most important, the biggest powers in the world. Of course, we have that system with the permanent five in the UN Security Council, in which 3 of the 5 are basically always on board for the same things, and only Russia and China periodically will counter the hegemony of these 3 other nations, which of course means that if any anti-imperialist or anti-hegemonic resolution gets offered by China or Russia, they will immediately be vetoed by, or by any other nation. They will immediately be vetoed by either the US, France, or the United Kingdom. So this is a major problem. You can say that the United Nations, in a way, is not updated to work in a multipolar world, in the world that we live in now, in which nations want to build their own future and do not want to be completely dependent on the will and of certain hegemonic major powers. So I think that is one of the major issues, one of the major dangers that we're facing these days, that a so-called neutral organization is basically still at the mercy of a handful of nations and a handful of elites controlling those nations, and thus actually controlling much of the world.
Well, Seth, who should pay for all the carnage in Syria, even if we're just talking about the Douma incident? We saw the U.S., UK, France just basically go and bomb there afterwards, killing people and just walk away. Any of these countries are going to pay any repercussions?
Well, the people of Syria have certainly already paid, and the people of Iraq have certainly already paid. The sad truth is that major powers rarely pay for their crimes. And with this Douma report, I mean, for the OPCW, they had certified that all the weapons, the chemical weapons in Syria, had been destroyed back in 2014. It's really ridiculous that now they're coming back and doing that, and the European powers and America, they'll never pay for their crimes, and that's the real sad thing. Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump are all war criminals, but unless they were to lose in a very big way, they'll never be held accountable for their actions.
What about that, Brett? Do you think that it's going to continue as it has, or do you see a transition on the horizon as more and more countries now become allied? Even as we speak today, we see actually maritime maneuvers taking place right now between with Iran and Russia and China working together Are we on the crux of a change in this, or no? Do you think it's going to continue the way it has been?
Fundamentally, I would say I'm optimistic about the future. Of course, it's a matter of fact that we are really at a 5 to 12 sort of scenario. It is really far beyond time for massive change to occur, for the U.S. hegemony, Western hegemony in general to end, for this sort of neoliberal and neoconservative imperialism that has dominated the world for so long to finally come to an end, and for basically a truly multipolar world to emerge from the ashes of the unipolar world that has existed ever since the end of the Cold War, in which the United States was basically the only major pole of power. But I do believe fundamentally that there is light, let's say, at the end of the tunnel. There is a massive change has been going on for quite a long time. You see, economically speaking, the rise of countries like China, like Russia, and of course also like Iran itself. You see, militarily speaking, the axis of resistance in the Middle East. Right. You see resistance brewing in Africa, in Latin America. Recently, we had even countries that you would not really expect it from, countries that were very firmly in the grasp of imperialist hegemony until recently. For example, nations like Qatar and Malaysia hosting this alternative OIC conference, this alternative Islamic conference, completely without Saudi Arabia, without the Wahhabi, agents of imperialism in Kuala Lumpur. So you see this. Of course, you can't be too hopeful. It's not an immediate massive change that is going to overthrow the system.
I'm so sorry. I have to cut you off because we are flat out of time. I appreciate both of our guests being with us. Journalists for Al Masdar News, Brett Yonkers out of Brussels, and U.S. veteran Seth Manzel out of Bellevue, Nebraska. And as always, viewers, we appreciate you being with us on Another Debate. I'm Marzia Hashemi signing out for myself and other crew right here in Tehran. Hope to see you next time.